We will be going over the basics of lighting in Unreal Engine. So first, let's take a look at the project settings. If we go down into rendering and Lumen, if you have a graphics card that supports ray tracing like an RTX 30 series, 20 series, 40 series, or so on, you can enable support hardware ray tracing and also use hardware ray tracing when available. This will enable ray traced shadows, which look slightly better than lumen shadows in some scenarios. But if you don't have a graphics card that supports ray tracing, that's not a problem. You can still follow along. There won't be much of a difference. And also, if you search RHI and make sure the default RHI is DirectX 12. Now let's go over the lights that we have available. So if we click on this panel over here, we can access the lights from here. We can just drag and drop them, or if you click on Place Actors panel, this will place the entire panel on the left of the screen, and we can go under lights and access our lights from here. So the first light we have is a directional light. This is basically a sunlight. This affects the entire world. It casts light over the entire world, so moving this light will not change anything, and but we can rotate this light. This is usually used to light outdoor scenes or to cast a light through a window or something like that. It's used as the sun. Also, we can see over here that lumen works automatically. We have bounce lighting, so if lumen was disabled, it would look something like this. It would be entirely black. But since Lumen is working, we have bounce lighting automatically. Also, if we come over here over the settings, the first thing we want to change is the mobility, static, stationary, and movable. Unreal Engine has basically two systems, a dynamic lighting system, which is Lumen, and they also have baked lighting. So static would be used for bake lighting if you want to bake the light, and movable is dynamic lighting like lumen, and stationary is a mix of both. So usually if you're using lumen or ray tracing, you want to change the light to movable. So the next setting we have is intensity. You can change the light intensity, and we can go over the limit of 150. If we type in 500, it becomes brighter. So this is where you change the intensity of the light. And next setting is light color. Here you can change the color of the light. And the next setting is source angle. So what the source angle does is, if you see in the reflection, this is the size of the light, and if I make the light the source angle 50, it becomes bigger. So it changes the size. The source angle is only for the directional light. So as you can see, the shadow, if I make the source angle bigger, it becomes softer, smaller becomes sharper. Next thing is we have temperature. If we use temperature, we can change this to make it look colder or warmer. And that's about the main settings for the directional light. The next light we have is a point light. So a point light is basically one point that emits light in all directions. So rotating this will make absolutely no difference. We can move this point around. So in the settings, we have mostly similar settings. We have the light intensity, we have the color, but now we have attenuation radius. What this does is the distance this light will affect. So if I make this smaller, the light will affect less of a distance. If I make this bigger, it affects more. And instead of in the direction light, we had source angle. In the point light, what we have is source radius. What this does, it makes the point light bigger. So if I increase this, you can see this circle, this yellow circle that shows the size of the source, and the shadows have become softer. And the rest of the settings are pretty much the same in all of the lights. The next light is a spotlight. As the name implies, it's a spotlight. You can rotate this and you can move this. And some of the settings that are different, we have the same attenuation radius and other stuff, but we have the cone angle, which is mainly the difference. We change the cone angle here. Next up, we have rect light, which is my favorite light. It basically acts like a soft box. It's a rectangle that casts light. You can see in the reflection the shape. Here you can change the size, the source width. You can see in the reflections how it affects the shape of the light and the source height. You can change this to make the light much bigger. It's basically like a soft box. Next up we have the skylight. This light is different from the rest of the lights. What this light does is it captures a cube map or an HDRI of your entire scene and it casts light on everything. So since everything is black right now, we can't see anything. So I'm going to add some lights. And now if we go into the intensity of this light, it's using the sky and everything around it to cast a light everywhere. But we can also use this to cast an HDRI. So if I delete all the lights, and now in source type, if I change this to specified cube map, I can select one and now it's using this HDRI to cast lighting in the entire scene. So some of the settings we have are the resolution. So if I make this bigger, it becomes more sharper. You can see here, becomes sharper. The resolution, we have the intensity, and and we have the angle to rotate this light. So this can be used as an HDRI light, or it could be used to enhance your indirect lighting in outdoor scenes. The last light we have is an HDRI backdrop. This isn't enabled by default, so you want to go into Edit and Plugins and search for HDRI and enable this plugin. Once you do, you'll be able to see this, and if you drag and drop this inside your scene, you can move this around. You can change the projection center. Also, sometimes if this isn't casting any light, you want to make this bigger. So over here in size, if I make this 5000, this is now casting light everywhere. So we can use this as an HDRI backdrop, and we have some settings. We have the size, we have the projection center, and if we click use camera projection, then it will look like this. We can change the cube map over here if we have some imported to change the lighting setup. This is another way of using HDRIs. The first one was the skylight. What that does is it only uses the lighting information but doesn't make a dome around you, and this makes a dome around you and uses the lighting information. So one last point I want to go over is ray traced shadows. So I'll use this rec light as an example. So if I put this over here and increase the intensity, so the difference between ray trace shadows and lumen shadows is lumen uses virtual shadow maps and ray trace shadows are calculated better. So if I search for ray trace and I hit enable, you can see the difference, how much more accurate and softer these shadows are. So if I disable it, they look like this. There are some hard lines and there's some artifacts. So a light that is really soft is Lumen doesn't really calculate that super well. It works in most scenarios, but there are some places where you'd want to use ray traced. So if you make this even bigger, something like this, and then we enable ray traced, you can search and enable, you can see the difference. It's a huge difference. Also in ray traced shadows, sometimes the shadows may be noisy. So one way to fix that is in samples per pixel. If you boost this up to something, they become much smoother. As you can see, these are noisy, and then if I bump this up, they become smooth. But remember that this setting does impact performance. Next up, I want to talk about indirect lighting. There are a few ways to control indirect lighting. The first way is you can increase the intensity of your original light, but this could affect a lot of other things that you don't want to change. So another way to affect indirect lighting is that you have the indirect lighting intensity, and if you boost this up, you can see that we can increase our indirect lighting. But there's another way that most people don't know about, is that the materials, the color value directly controls your indirect lighting. So if we select this wall and we open up this material, and if I put this over here, and if we make the color lighter, the indirect lighting values are boosted. So the darker, the less indirect lighting we have, and the brighter, the more indirect lighting we have. So make sure that you have the correct color values as well, and then you can adjust the other settings, like if like the light intensity or the indirect lighting intensity. So this is how Lumen calculates light, but this is also how light is calculated, or how it works in the real world. Another thing I wanted to show is that in Unreal Engine 5, in Lumen, you can use emissive materials, emissive objects to light stuff. So if we come here and create a new material, and if I click on 1 and then hold down 3 and click, and hold on M and click, I can put this into emissive color. I'm gonna make this something like orange, and I'll set the value here like 100 and save this material. So if I delete this light and I add a sphere and apply this material, you can see that it's lighting this entire scene. But make sure that you never use emissive materials as your main light, as if we move far away, you can see there's a lot of artifacts. There are a lot of problems with using emissive light. So these can add to your scene, but never use them as your primary light sources, because they don't have really high resolution and they cause a lot of artifacts if you use them primarily as your main light.